All right, and welcome to This is Podcasting. I'm Connor, and I'm here as always with Calvin.
Thanks for having me.
And we have McKinnon on as a guest again.
What's up?
And we have a very special guest. Katya is on today. Very excited to have you.
Hello, thank you.
You maybe can tell from the rainy storm clouds, the sound of that we're talking about Noah today, which is a Darren Aronofsky film. We've reviewed a couple of his in the past. We're kind of trying to add them to the suite. We've talked about The Fountain and Black Swan and Mother, so this is just another addition to that. It was written by Darren Aronofsky and Ari Handel, and it's adapted from the original story written by Moses.
I was going to say, I don't think he was the original author. Yeah.
For a moment, I actually thought we were talking about Requiem for a Dream, and I was like, that was the author of, because Requiem for a Dream is also a book.
Yes, but scholars think that Moses was the author of Genesis, so that was my joke.
The first 5 books of the
Right.
Bible, I think, actually.
Right, so Noah's released in 2014. It had a budget of $125 million, and it made $358, which I think is Aronofsky's highest grossing film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I think Black Swan was like 200 something.
You know, I might be wrong. I'd have to go back and look at the stats, because actually that one was bigger. I think it was like 500 or something like that. Anyways, it's about 2 hours and 18 minutes long, and it feels like 2 different movies. But let's get first impressions. McKinnon, what did you think of this movie?
I didn't think that much of it. I thought it was going to be more similar to Mother, which had a lot to unpack, but I didn't feel like this movie had a lot to unpack. I was underwhelmed.
All right.
But I think that this movie is probably easier to digest for the general public than Mother, because Mother had so much to unpack.
Oh, I agree with you. I think it's more general audience than Mother is, but I still think it's we'll get into it later, but I think it's alienating in a lot of ways, especially to Christians, which we'll find out there's a lot of controversy surrounding this movie. Yeah. Calvin, what did you think of this movie?
So this was actually a movie that was coming out at the tail end of college. So we'd seen Requiem for a Dream, Black Swan, I'd seen The Wrestler. So Aronofsky plays a lot with biblical themes, even before Mother, when he just went, as deeply biblical as he possibly could. So there were these themes and these ideas in all of his other movies, and then so when we found out that Noah was coming out, he just went full Bible. And
I know you've said that before.
Yeah, and so I still hadn't seen it for a while because I imagined that this was actually what it was going to be. I felt like it was going to be a fairly straightforward narrative. I think it is his most accessible films, mostly because, well, it's actually The Wrestler is also a fairly accessible film. It's not quite such a psychodrama like Black Swan is, but it's been a long time since I've seen that. But even still, there are parts I feel that are the typical Aronofsky fare, the fast editing, the very uncomfortable crowd scenes, but it's not to the same degree as Black Swan or Mother or Requiem for a Dream. So, yeah, this was not the movie that I wanted out of Aronofsky. I was expecting something a little bit more psychodrama, and that happens for like half of the movie, but in a really weird way.
Right. Katya, what did you think of this one?
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I expected it to be a lot more psychological. And then me being I did not have a Christian upbringing. So that's been another big thing is I knew about the flood, but so I don't really know what if this was the story, what if this was Aronofsky. So for me, it was just pretty confusing in that sense.
No, I'm excited for your perspective on that because we've said before, but Calvin, McKinnon, and I, we all went to the same church growing up. I mean, we knew each other from church. So these stories are something that's really common to me. And that's part of why I didn't really like Mother very much, because it seemed so obvious and so on the nose. But for someone who didn't grow up in the church, that might be a more, a film you can kind of discover more.
Yeah.
Than something for me where I was I know this is boring. I know what Cain and Abel is. So
yeah.
I'm interested in finding your perspective on it because it feels like just a story I've known my whole life. So
yeah.
that'll be good to hear.
I didn't even know there was 3 brothers. So I was like, oh, wow, I've already learned something in the first 5 minutes.
I believe the youngest brother is added in. He's not in the Bible.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, Ham is the youngest one.
Well,
I meant
no.
Seth, Cain, and Abel. I didn't even know about Seth.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And no, Shem, Ham, and Japheth are all in the Bible.
Oh, maybe I read that.
I mean, they were released on Teacher Barb's felt boards. So
see, it must be true. Oh, no, you're totally right. I thought this movie opened up. It looked like the cinematic for like an early 2000s real-time strategy. Oh, it's like the Earth populating, the armies spreading, and like the little there's like text to kind of explain what's going on. So right off the bat, I was just like, this does not seem like an Aronofsky movie at all.
Right. It's like biblical RuneScape.
Yeah, that's so what I thought.
It felt really removed from the rest of the movie. I thought the way it was filmed and like it was like grady kind of. I don't know if that's the right word for it. Yeah, it felt like it didn't belong in that movie.
Yeah, and I got that like silly typeface, and you're just like, oh,
I'm so glad you brought up the font,
Yeah.
because that's the first thing I thought. I was like, this doesn't look professional. It looks like a
No.
kid made it for like a presentation or something.
Exactly.
It's really odd.
wow, this is supposed to be a big movie, right?
Yeah. And I also thought this is going to be like just big, epic, Michael Bay-esque nonsense, kind of a big just cash grab for Darren Aronofsky. Like he's made a lot of kind of weird avant-garde films that were his vision, and now he kind of just gets to make some money because he's a notable director now. And it felt like that way for part of the movie, and then it really changed, and I was like, okay, there's the Aronofsky flair. And I'm not sure if it fit as well as I thought it would. It's definitely not as like gratuitous as like his style is in his other movies, but it's still there. It's just a more subtle way, like Calvin mentioned earlier. But I also think it is accessible in a way, but I also think it's like alienating in a way, because I think it caused a lot of, like we said, controversy with like a Christian audience. But we'll get more into that, and I'm pretty excited to talk about this one. It's definitely weird, and not as, I guess.
It's not weird in the way I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Which is disappointing.
I didn't think it was weird at all because the bar is so high with Aronofsky's films. I didn't think this movie was weird at all.
It seemed to just kind of like go
It was
by
so
the story.
It was so by the books. I think
Yeah.
comparing it to like a Michael Bay film for like a cash grab, I think is a really good way to put it because it doesn't feel like his other films.
I think it's just still more odd than a Michael Bay film.
Yeah.
It still felt like it had Aronofsky's fingerprints of weirdness on it.
Yeah, it felt like up until like the flood, like everything after the flood kind of had more of his fingerprints on it, I felt like.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so I want to start out with like, what are our thoughts coming into this movie? We're aware of Darren Aronofsky and kind of his style, but what did you think of him going into a biblical story like Noah? Katya, what did you think of that?
Yeah, well, the most recent one I'd seen was Requiem for a Dream with Calvin.
Yes.
So yeah, and then with Black Swan, I haven't seen a ton of his movies, but yeah, I was expecting more like just Noah, like just him, like what's going on with him, and all the struggle that he goes through in the second half. Like, am I gonna kill my family, or what's gonna happen?
Yeah, right.
Do you mean like exclusively his perspective?
Exclusively him. Yeah. And also for some reason, half the time that the title was mentioned, I was like, wait, what is this movie about? Like, who's Noah? Like, I kept not connecting that it was about the biblical Noah, just because it just didn't make sense that
There's
it would just
another
be the biblical Noah.
Another
Right.
Noah who was
Yeah.
a part of a big flood.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well,
Well,
because
I just
I would keep saying like, oh yeah, we're watching Noah, and man, it's so weird, and like, yeah,
Yeah.
what is that about again?
Why is that
Exactly.
weird?
I
Yeah.
know. I was just, I don't know. So yeah, the reviews from Calvin were not very positive, so I wasn't really looking forward to watching it. And then having, the biblical, I don't know. I expected it to be more psychological, a little bit more controversial.
Right, and that's weird to me. Not weird to me, but it's interesting that like you went into it expecting it being more psychological, and I went into it expecting like, oh, it's just going to be a bunch of CGI waves, and it's just going to be like battles, and like it's just going to be nonsense. So I like that there's we both went into it with like different expectations. McKinnon, what did you think about going into a biblical story told by Darren Aronofsky?
I didn't really have much of an idea going into it except for Mother, and that was like the baseline I was going off of. But I didn't expect it to be crap. I don't have any idea how to answer that question because it's so different from Mother. So he couldn't just copy what is in the Bible one for one because that would be incredibly boring. So there were certain changes that needed to be made to make it more, I think, more accessible to like a wider audience. But the version of the movie that's more accessible to a wider audience, I don't think is a psychological movie, which feels different than the movies that he's known for making.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting that they talk about, like Ari Handel has talked about how, and Aronofsky have talked about how it's interesting the story arc of mercy and justice and applying that to Noah. And you can kind of see those themes tied through the whole movie, but they're so sparse, and it's in all of this giant creation story too. It's like they're trying to be intimate with Noah's perspective on everything, but also talk about this wide history and God in general. And it's trying to do too many things, which is so strange because I feel like Aronofsky has been a filmmaker long enough to know like what his niche is. It's like, I want to get in one person's head or maybe a couple people's heads and like Requiem for a Dream and express all of that the same way. So going into this that way, I think is so strange. Like, I feel like he should have just dumped everything about getting inside of Noah's head and just concentrated on the whole story arc and forgotten about why Noah cares about any of this stuff. Because for a narrative, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
No, I agree with you. One of the things I took away from this is I didn't really care for any of the performances because I don't think any of the characters really matter.
Except for Emma Watson, right?
She screamed a couple times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Emma Watson is Katya's favorite actress.
But I just went away from it. I was like, none of the characters really matter. What matters is like the theme or the message, which ends up kind of being like, is humanity the parasite? Like, are we the problem? Like, that's essentially the message of the second half. I think the first half is about like judgment and, humanity getting what it deserves, which is more in line with the actual story in the Bible. The second half of the movie is where it kind of departs from that, and that's where a lot of the controversy comes from. But I left the movie being like, I don't really care about the characters at all because it's not really about that. So,
and they don't feel real.
No, they do not.
The characters are just plot devices.
The only thing I think is Russell Crowe's portrayal of Noah. I kind of like the idea of playing around with maybe just his interpretation of the message from God.
He's so sinister.
Yeah.
It was not it. That's not how I ever pictured the story of Noah before.
No, and I agree, because part of our upbringing was we see these books, we hear these stories from like Bibles with pictures in them, and it's like,
Noah's one of like the big Bible figures that you're taught about. Yeah,
it's like a cute story, like we're saving the animals, we're getting on the ark. We get to the dove brings the olive branch, and it's like a nice story. So to hear it retold in a way that's like you said, much more dark, much more sinister.
Yeah, it's so gritty. There's like a stowaway on the ship who tries to kill him. Yeah, it's gritty.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting too is there's a lot of problems with the biblical Noah story in this idea of balancing justice and mercy, and they don't make any sense. Why does God save these ones? What is the point of destroying your creation if you knew they were going to do it already? And then taking all of those problems and then applying them to a person who is acting as a mediator of God's will is even more problematic. Like, at what point does he get to decide what God's message is, what God's intention is, who gets spared and who gets killed? Like, why in the world is he trying to, like, does he think that he needs to kill this baby? Why have people on a boat being saved from the flood if they're just supposed to die out?
Yeah. No, and that's why I really like the idea of it's playing with Noah's interpretation of the message he's gotten, because, and I feel like a lot of Christians would be upset with this, but a lot of the Bible is interpretations of perceived signs or miracles that the writers got from God. Mm-hmm. So, we grew up with this, the Bible is, the word is God breathed and it's all intentional and it's what he meant. But I think there's a real aspect to biblical stories that you can take and consider as this is a person's interpretation. And so I like the way that this movie played with that idea of Noah interpreting it, maybe wrong, maybe right, but then the viewer gets to kind of decide on their own, like, oh, like maybe I agree with this, or maybe Noah's like he's kind of having a breakdown, and he's not perceiving this message correctly. So I like that idea of it. As far as characters go, that's like the only relevant part of this movie, I think.
Yeah. I thought that made the most sense. Like, for me, not expecting, like, I always picture God's word to be like someone heard it and then they decided to do something with it, because arguably Noah and like Tubal-Cain, they both want people to survive in the end, but for completely different reasons.
Right.
So I think it's way more cool to think, okay, God made Noah, and then if God can do whatever he wants, why not just leave it up to the person? Because in the end, that's what matters, and he'll do the right thing if he's really in my image or whatever.
I liked what he said. He's like, I'm not righteous. I'm just the one who can carry out the task.
Yeah.
So I like the way it paints Noah. Again, he's like the only interesting character in this whole movie to me.
Yeah, and he's kind of tortured. But I like what what you were bringing up, this idea of like inspired word. What do you think then of the fact that so much of the inspiration of this movie is non-canonical? A lot of it is taken from Enoch, actually.
Yeah, that was what I had read. Was one of the big controversies is they're like, this isn't like canon for the Bible. But like inspiration is pulled from that. Like, aren't the Nephilim, the Watchers, are pulled from from that as well.
So the Nephilim are mentioned one time in the canonical Bible,
Right.
and they are generally translated as being fallen or giants, but no one has any consensus on the etymology of that word. It's probably best, some scholars argue that it's probably best to leave it untranslated the way it is, because Enoch goes into way more detail about the Nephilim and how the daughters of men lay with the Nephilim and gave us the heroes of old. Enoch fills in the giant gap of history between Cain and Abel and Noah, which is, it's really massive, which is why I think it's so cool that this is a post-apocalyptic looking world, because civilization could look like anything. We don't really know how much amount of time. I think it's guessed that there's around 2,000 years between them because of the genealogies that they're given, but that's really our best guess of it. So going completely non-canonical, I think, really is. I don't know why you don't just make things up. It's rather than going non-canonical.
Yeah, I liked it. I actually liked the Watchers. I thought it was a cool addition, especially I loved their little backstory that kind of how they fall to earth and they are molten and they crack out of it. I was like, that's actually really. It was a really concise, and it told you exactly what was going on, and it did it in a really visually interesting way. It wasn't just like this exposition. It was really neat. I liked how they were introduced.
They answered a lot of questions.
Yeah.
For some of our viewers who might not know, what is Enoch?
Oh, Enoch was whose father was Enoch? Was Methuselah's father. Enoch is said to not have died. He was taken up with God when he was walking with him.
Oh, right. Yes, I recall.
So, and that's why, and that's also part of the mythology behind why he wrote these books. I can't remember how many Enochs there are, first and second, but they're thought to have been written around 100 or 300 BC.
Okay.
So still 400 to 600 years before the Council of Nicaea. So all of the Old Testament should be older than Enoch, and which is why it's not considered canon.
Okay.
But as far as things that are not canon, like the rocks, that light up and combust.
Yeah.
That's totally added in.
Magic rocks.
Oh yeah, what is it called? Zohar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did they give them a name? I didn't know if
Yeah.
I missed it or not.
Yeah, the ground is rich with Zohar.
I thought it was so odd. It felt like there was a lot of emphasis put on them at the beginning of the film. And then they really don't appear again. I think when Noah's telling the story of creation, he has it clasped and he covers it up to, saying the universe started in darkness and everything. But that's its only reappearance. I thought it was going to play some major role, like they were going to make bombs with it or something to defend the ark.
The villain does. What? Tubal Cain? What's his name?
He has a weapon.
Yeah.
Tubal Cain.
Yeah.
And then Noah burns Shem's boat.
It's just not. It's not as for as much attention as it got in the beginning of the film. I didn't think it really had any payoff.
thought,
you don't really go into it at all. So that's another non-canon thing.
It was
that
going to
Yeah.
pan out with a big payoff, like an emotional comparison to something else or
Right.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the only reason that they used Zohar, despite that whole first scene being so weird, giving Noah a backstory of a hero and a villain, I thought was unnecessary.
Yeah.
But it's also said in Enoch that the Nephilim taught men metallurgy. So I think that's where they take. I just don't know why you would why you have to give a mineral a name and make it kind of seem like it's going to be integral to the story.
Exactly. That's my point. Is it felt like it was going to matter later, and it doesn't really.
Well, the first scene with Noah was just to set up the snakeskin thing, right? That was the only point of it.
But it was also Tubal Cain was the one that killed his father.
Sure, it was to set up the villain also.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it was just so goofy. He's like, oh my gosh, men, run, hide, and then he goes up, all defiant, what are you doing here? And it's you're a single man against a giant army of Watchers, and then he just kills him in just a really overdramatic way. It was so not Aronofsky. Aronofsky is over the top, but not in but in his formalism, not necessarily in his subject matter.
It's more subtle the way he's over the top.
Yeah, exactly. In Requiem for a Dream, it's unnerving and everything, but there's not a lot of things that are directly upsetting because of the image it's shown. It's the way that he tells the story. All of the editing, the close-ups, the camera, the lenses, the angles. Those things are what are upsetting and create the discomfort in Aronofsky's movies, and that drives the plot. Here, it was just a weird act of violence that we were supposed to be like upset about, but it was, ham-fisted. And I think that if the only thing you can call ham-fisted about Darren Aronofsky is his style, not his subject matter.
Yeah, I think that's why this movie it didn't feel like an Aronofsky film to me. Yeah, that murder of Nova's father wasn't backed by anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But isn't that the whole kind of point of Noah's story, that it's the violent humans? Like, so to have just someone just being violent and you don't understand why, no reason.
I think
know.
in that case it could have been anyone. It didn't need to be Noah's father. It could have just been them killing any stranger.
And I feel like that's also kind of the thing that you hope for or count on when you're making a story on the Bible, that everybody knows this story, or the people that are coming to see it know this story enough to know that these people are evil. We don't need to create a backstory of how Noah's father was killed by anyone, because these people are just evil because that's just right. Because that's all that's all the justification the Bible gives. So going any further than that, you would have needed a lot more, I feel like, to make it to underscore how badly humans had become. And how far they had strayed from God, rather than just having one guy kill Noah's father and get this very melodramatic, emotional. Like, I mean, it feels more like a soap opera than it does an actual drama, right, because of the way you've set everything up.
Yeah,
I think another part is non-canon is Noah's sons had wives when they got on the ark in the Bible, and so to have them not have wives, and that brings up kind of that tension between Ham and Noah, where he eventually is going to betray Noah because he lost his chance to have a wife. Which, that scene when the girl he's with gets trampled, that's when I was like, okay, now I know I'm watching an Aronofsky movie, because he doesn't do violence in a way that's like stylized or gory the same way like Quentin Tarantino does. Like that's like really, I don't want to say fun stylized violence. But people go to watch those movies because they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to get the blood everywhere. I'm going to get the people flying around after being shot and everything. Aronofsky does violence in a way that is subtle, but it also makes your stomach hurt. That was the first scene where I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm watching an Aronofsky movie. So I actually like that change by not having wives or anything like that. It adds that tension in, and then it really makes the story or the interpretation that Noah has that humanity is meant to end. Their only purpose was to get these animals on the ark and then eventually die out because humanity is essentially the problem. So I liked that change in like the canon.
Mm-hmm. And it made more sense for like the end, when it made more sense for all the family members, and the drama, because like when Ham leaves, Calvin told me it's just because he saw his dad naked, and then I was like, well, that doesn't really make sense. Yeah. So for someone that doesn't know the story, it makes way more sense to have motivations for everything.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't just leave; he's cursed by Noah to leave. I don't know if you remember that in the story. They filmed it exactly as it happened. The only thing is that Noah turns to Ham and says, because the Bible says Ham looked upon his father's nakedness, and Noah cursed him and his entire line and banished him. And those become the people of Canaan.
Which would have been an odd way for the movie to end, so I'm glad they didn't do that.
Exactly, because it's a stupid thing, like in general, like, right. Oh, I'm sorry that you got drunk on the beach and you're punishing me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what I was going to say. It's essentially Noah's fault.
It's because he didn't cover up his father. He just stood and watched. Because his brothers came and covered him up, and that was the appropriate thing to do.
Yeah, the way that he responds, though, is that it's just the fact that he saw his nakedness, not that he tried to help him or anything. Because it's emphasized specifically that his brothers covered him up by turning their backs to him and pulling the blanket over him so as not to see his nakedness. That was the sin that Ham committed, was seeing his father naked, which is just, this is silly.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Calvin, because I have my Bible right here. So give me a second, and I'll let you know if you're right or wrong.
You really pulled out a Bible. I'm shocked. So we've mentioned before that this movie, it feels like two movies. It changes its direction and its themes once the flood has happened and the ark is afloat. Katya, what do you think of the first half? What do you think the message is? And then what do you think the message is in the second half? And do they blend together at all, or is it kind of really did you find it to be like an abrupt change between the narratives?
Yeah, well, I definitely found an abrupt change. I stopped the movie and like made some French fries, and I didn't really like. I was like, okay, this is probably it's only halfway done. Like at that point, I was looking at what was going on. So yeah, the first half just seemed like some epic, sci-fi type movie with lots of battles, and so I much preferred the second half. That's when I wanted to see. I was like, oh, I wish they would have just been like started on the boat and started discovering these things. For me, that would have been a lot more exciting. Because from the first half, I got the message that like everything's over.
There was like a finality to it.
Yeah, like everything, like humans are terrible.
So did you?
And Noah's given up on them. Like after he walks through the village and he's just like he lets the girl get trampled. That's when I wrote in my notes like Noah turned evil because he just let an innocent girl get trampled. And I thought the whole point was that only animals are innocent, but there are so many innocent people too. Mm-hmm. So the first half just seemed like this. Yeah, we're giving up on everybody. Noah's committed. And then the second half became much more interesting because then he gets to change his mind.
Yeah, I definitely think the first half is much more, it's about judgment,
yes.
which is much more in line with the biblical themes. Mm-hmm. And then the second half kind of turns into a like conservation or a commentary on climate change, how we treat the biomes that we live in, how we affect ecosystems and stuff like that. And that's why I think it's kind of an odd change. But I think the second half is much more of a Darren Aronofsky movie than the first half is. Mm-hmm. Like he does like these commentaries and stuff. Like that's a big part of Mother, is talking about like how we treat the earth and now like humanity is the problem. So it's clearly a theme that carries out in the second half of this movie. I just don't think it fits at all. I agree with you. It's like just make the whole movie that then.
Yeah, exactly. Make the whole movie that, or make it all about the Bible. Because it seems like it's up to us to save everything, but not everything.
Right.
So
and it gets very Harry Potter-esque because it's all about love at the end. It's all about the love he saw for his own grandchildren.
Right.
So Katya, would you say like the battle felt really out of place to you?
Yeah, I didn't really see the need for the battle.
Okay. Just have the conflict be with the people trying to get on the ark and then the flood come?
Yeah, it would have been much cool. I mean, it makes sense to have a battle. It makes sense that everybody, they've been building this ark for a long time. There should be people there, but I almost think there should have been more stowaways and more like little scuffles like the whole time. Like
I wish that they did more with the Watchers because the Watchers' whole point is that they're trying to help the humans, but here they are at the end of the movie killing a bunch of humans.
Yeah.
So I wish that they did more with like the internal conflict with the Watchers being like, well, we're here to help these people who are following out what God told them to do. But here's this other group of humans who are trying to survive and get on the ship also, which was their whole point for being on the planet in the first place, trying to help humans.
Mm-hmm.
So
Which was confusing.
It is confusing. I wish that they did more with the Watchers.
Yeah, because it seemed like they almost got rewarded at the end for just following this guy because he said God was talking to him.
Right.
And all they wanted was to get back in God's good graces.
Right.
Kind of. And
so,
they did.
Yeah, is their motivation to get on God's good graces and come back to heaven, or is it to help humans? Because it seems like it's both sometimes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think the movie becomes more accessible if you have a battle in it because people want to go and see that, and it's fun for a wider audience. I also think it's probably going to cause, or did cause, a lot of problems with the Christian audience because people don't want to see the Bible painted as like a fantasy. They want to see it as like, this is what actually happened. These miracles took place. These events really happened because their whole belief system is built on that. And so I think when you have kind of like a Lord of the Rings-esque battle in your movie about Noah, it's gonna cause some controversy. People are gonna be turned off to that. I also think the Watchers in that scene, they look like the the rock titan from Hercules.
Yeah, the rock titan or like rock ents.
Yeah,
like the,
yeah, that's the other thing I thought. Yeah, they look like ents. I just thought there's not enough facial characteristics. Mm-hmm. They look cartoony, and that was my big problem with like the character design of those. When you put them in what's supposed to be your epic, like kind of violent climax in the movie, and your kind of like hero characters in it look really goofy, it kind of takes some of the wind out of that. That was kind of my only problem with like the way that they were created. But yeah, I do think that having kind of that fantasy element makes it more accessible to more people, but it's definitely going to cause problems for people who take these stories very seriously.
Yeah, I did like the way they were designed because I felt like it looked like an actual affliction. The way they walked, it looked like
They were limping and
yeah,
stuff. Yeah,
exactly. And I feel like that was supposed to why the faces looked the way they did is because they were not supposed to look angelic anymore. I didn't like the fact that it switched to the second half, and I liked the second half a lot worse because I felt like we had set up this biblical epic, and that's what we were concentrating on. We weren't concentrating on who these people really were. We were just talking about the story. So to then decide to get into Noah's head, even though that is, I think, a more interesting story to tell, I don't think it was justified by what was at the beginning, because the beginning, it's just like this post-apocalyptic angel battle, and then in the second half it's just Alien, and and he's skulking around like, I'm gonna get that baby, and like that's like
Oh, that's what he. Okay, I understand.
You said in your
now,
notes
yeah.
spiritual successor to Alien, and McKenna and I were like, what is he talking
I
about?
thought you meant Prometheus because like the beginning of Prometheus is about like populating the planet and stuff.
Yeah.
So I was like, what is he talking about? But that makes sense.
yeah. So that's the thing. It's like tonally, that's the same movie. It's just
Yeah.
like you have like this presence sneaking around in the shadows, and it's trying to kill you, and that's I just felt like it was very, very strange, and I didn't think that it was in line with Noah's character. Like, God had not specifically told him anything. He did exactly what God told him to do, right? That was not something that God told him to do, so I don't know why he was following through with that idea.
So in your comparison to Alien, are you saying that Noah is the one skulking around the shadows, or the stowaway?
No, Noah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, he was Tubal Cain was there the whole time, but
He wasn't skulking, but he wasn't a big player until the very end.
Yeah, he literally somehow hid on that boat for a year.
Yeah.
which is
It's
that's
a huge
probably
boat.
It was only 40 days, Calvin.
Well, for the rain.
I
but
know.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I felt like that was actually the hardest thing for me to, in this world of fantasy and mushroom tea, like that was the thing I had the hardest thing believing. Yeah, that too, like the fact that Noah's visions were kind of drug induced.
They're all psychedelic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that. I don't feel like that was brought up enough in controversies that I read, that I feel like that should have rankled a lot more people than it did. The fact that Methuselah is kind of like a wizard.
Yeah. I got Merlin vibes from him.
Yeah. He's just like scraping at the ground like berries.
Right.
Berries.
I liked at the end he finally gets the berry.
Yeah.
I was like, what a good character arc.
Well, the whole time I was like, I need to ask what the point of the berry is, because I always miss like symbols and stuff. So it's good to know that some of it just
No,
it's just
it
totally
just didn't-
random.
Yeah, that's one of those things that you'd be reading way too much into that, because that it was just supposed to be like a quirk for that character.
Well, I think that the berry was rolled into Anthony Hopkins' contract, and that's why it was in the movie. So I was consulting the scripture, and I was curious: is Ham the youngest brother? He was the youngest.
No,
one, right?
Japheth is the youngest.
Okay, yeah, it's confusing. Yeah, so you're right. He got banished because he looked at his father naked.
Yeah, isn't that so dumb?
Yeah.
That's what I mean by the problem. The inherent problems of the story are magnified when you decide to make it a 2-hour epic, and it's like, a few stanzas.
Well, it wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't make sense to send away his son because he looked at him naked, because he did much worse before that. So it makes sense that he would either go away on his own because he felt ashamed of what he did, or his father would be like, you should feel ashamed for what you did, go away.
Right. So it's interesting to me that they chose to change that, but keep more or less the story of Noah the same. You know what I mean? Because I feel like there are thematic problems. This idea of like who gets to be saved and when, and how much evil is too much evil, and why is there redemption at all for these characters?
Do you mean like Noah's character is inconsistent?
The idea of who dies. Just in the biblical story, like why is Noah the only one that doesn't get killed?
Well, I think biblically speaking, it's he's like viewed as like the only person just enough to survive. Him and
Right,
his family.
which seems I feel like that's
Which isn't very
unlikely.
well. It's not very well portrayed in this movie, because
Right.
I wrote down a note. I was like, man, Russell Crowe is really good at killing.
yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, yeah.
He's-
That's a great point. He's actually he probably has the higher death count of anyone in the
He kills
movie.
more people than anyone, yeah. Which really surprised me, yeah.
So I want to move on to some of the controversy surrounding this movie. I found an article where the Catholic Church kind of put out a statement saying that this was a missed opportunity. It's Noah without God. and they said it's more of a ecological New Age retelling. Do you agree with that? Do you think it matters? And do you think the movie is better off for not following this like kind of point per point, from like a literal biblical retelling?
Isn't this movie like different in almost every way from the biblical telling?
Well, I mean, you got the main plot points. The flood does happen.
There's a flood that happens, but like none of the characters act like they do in the Bible.
Yeah, but what I mean is the movie better off for veering away from that? And like the Catholic Church said, it's a missed opportunity. Do you view this as a missed opportunity? Is this really even a story for Christians, or was it just a New Age retelling?
Yeah. Well, so you and I were talking about this before we started recording, that I think if they just copied the story one for one for what's in the Bible, it would be incredibly boring. So they had to change some stuff to make it more viewable by a larger audience. So I think that they made the best movie that they could to show the story that they wanted to show. And if they changed anything, it was a good change.
All right.
Yeah, I'd actually say, I feel like if you're saying that this was a missed opportunity, that would mean that there is some sort of good moral implication of this story that you can then take as an example of like, this is God and his goodness. And I think that's ridiculous, because that is not what this story is. If you really break it down in God being all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, he would never have created these people in the first place, because if he knew he was going to destroy them because they were going to corrupt his creation, that's ridiculous. Like, I'm just going to make these people, I know they're going to screw up, I'm just going to kill them and start over. That is a stupid story. That makes this God feel very childish. I don't think that you're painting the picture that you want then of your all-knowing creator. I think that Noah really should be thought of as it needs to be about like a man being pious in the face of evil, and take out all of the fantastical stuff. And it really needs to be very different from the actual Bible, because the actual Bible doesn't talk much about Noah or his thoughts. So all of that needs to get thrown out and needs to be retold if that's what you're really going for, because as it is not a good entry point into Christianity, especially since it's Old Testament. I mean,
which is all fire and brimstone
and killing people for making fun of their baldness.
Yes. Okay, and I want to move into another question that I had. It's pretty easy to look up and find criticisms of this movie, and one that I didn't find at all was Noah's telling of creation. And the way it's edited together, you get into this part where it's a single cell dividing, and it becomes a fish, and that moves on to become an amphibian, and then reptile, and then like a proto-mammal, and we move on into more complex forms of mammals. That to me seems like a straight-up depiction of evolution. I didn't really find any articles or any like Christian groups that were criticizing this at all, even though to me that's exactly what's being put on screen. So I wonder, like, is that how you guys interpreted that scene?
Yeah. Go ahead, Katya.
I was going to say, that was the first thing I saw. And someone coming into it not knowing what the Bible story was, what was canon, what wasn't. I think all of the images of the world and space, and then the evolution moment and the mushrooms and the mycelium vision moments, that's what made me think, oh, this isn't the Bible story. This isn't totally Christian.
This isn't your grandma's Bible story.
Yeah. But I also got excited about it, so.
It's definitely, I think it's visually one of the most interesting parts of the movie. Mm-hmm. I like how
they reuse one of the shots from the fountain of exploding Shababa.
Okay.
Yeah. It's 100%.
That's exactly what I thought.
I've seen the fountain enough times to know, like, oh yeah, that's exactly.
Okay, I'm glad you confirmed that for me, because that is exactly what I thought when that popped up on screen.
Which is a very non-Christian story, which in the middle of this sequence then lends more to your point that this is more a story of evolution,
right,
and the cycle of the universe than creationism. But I didn't take it so much as evolution at the first time I saw it, mostly because I was just not super invested.
Thank goodness we're talking about the movie then.
I know, but the other way I took it was it was the editing style for me. Like all of those things, including like if you go back to when the forest first sprouts and we have all of those streams snaking through the valleys and how it's just all of these cuts on top of cuts and top of cuts. I felt like that was the editing style, was just slowly changing form, not specifically evolution, but mostly because it was just a linear representation of form as we went through the days of creation. Which, you know, when I went back and rewatched it, I was like, oh yeah, that's probably evolution. But I didn't catch that at the first time because that's like, it was just like a bunch of different fish, not one fish going through one. I feel like that's the typical representation of evolution. Here's this one thing starting as a cell, slowly becoming a fish, becoming a reptile, becoming a mammal, becoming an ape and a human. And I feel like there's no controversy because, yeah, it's apes and then there's this bright light and then we just have glowing humanoid forms.
Right.
And I think that's really why it specifically skipped that step.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that. I still think to me, it was just implied that that's the next step in the evolution is to become human. But I also really understand your point. It's like it specifically stops there to be like humanity was created in God's image, so they're separate from like this evolutionary path. So I can understand that too. I just still, even if you take that part out, it still looks a lot like evolution, which is, it's something that Christianity is adamantly against. So
Well,
even if it doesn't end up being humans, it still, to me, depicts single-celled organisms becoming mammals.
And it's actually interesting that you say that. I read The Problem of Pain last year by C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis actually brings up the idea that maybe evolution was the tool that God used for creation.
Right.
So in certain avenues of Christianity, some people do believe this.
I certainly don't want to generalize and be like every Christian believes that, but it seems to be a pretty prominent tenet.
That's what we were taught.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
In both the church and I went to a Christian school from 1st through 12th grade. Then I went to CU Boulder because,
What a culture shock.
I needed a change of pace.
So my next question, and this is, I think, the most important one, it really addresses a major part of the movie, is Noah goes through several different hairstyles. And I want to know which one ranks the highest for you guys. So we have long hair Noah, we have shaved head Noah with beard. We then get scraggly hair, scraggly beard Noah, and then at the end you get more trimmed up Noah. So which one ranks at the top for you guys?
I think the hairstyle he wore in Gladiator ranks the highest for me.
100%. That was my first thought. I was like, all right, I trust this guy.
Yeah.
Right.
Because it's Gladiator.
Also, speaking of, I think that's probably where he learned to kill so good, was probably...
Noah was really a crossover.
Yeah.
It's a shared universe.
Yeah.
I like shaved head, beard Noah, because also, yes, he's the best battler. And I like it's very imposing. It reminded me of like God of War.
He seems like seasoned.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The what?
Oh, I said he just seems like seasoned.
Yeah.
Like, this is me now.
I felt like the reason they shaved his head was really actually to drive the conflict and difference between him and Tubal-Cain and Tubal-Cain's long, unkempt hair.
I could see that, yeah.
Which, yeah, because that's such a big part at that point of the movie in terms of good versus evil. And then he gets on the boat and everyone's going crazy. And, everyone's got cabin fever, probably scurvy. But at that point, then hairstyles are less important.
Right.
Did Noah's hairstyle change after he was covered up, drunk, and naked, and then between that point and when he walked back to his wife and like helped her in the mud?
He does the ceremony with the snake skin, and that's when he's like, his beard is more trimmed.
Okay.
Because
I
it's
guess
really
nice.
unkempt when he's drunk.
Gotcha.
I also want to give a shout out to Shem, who has perfect hair the whole time.
Oh, yeah.
His hair and body and face, I think, are probably the best part of the movie.
That's the youngest brother, right?
No, that's the oldest. Why does everyone think
I don't
the
know.
youngest brother? You guys all
No,
think
I
he's
thought, no,
attractive.
I thought the middle brother, Ham. I thought that's who you were talking about. I thought he was a good looking dude.
Is that
No.
Logan Lerman?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, he was the only one I was watching the whole movie. I wanted to see what Percy Jackson was going to do.
Yeah, exactly. And those
Yeah.
eyes, man.
Yeah.
No.
How could you? I don't know why you'd get hung up on Shem when you could have a little piece of ham.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
You mentioned having the hairstyle be different to like oppose Tubal-Cain. And apparently a big part of the casting, they wanted him to be someone who could be physically imposing on screen compared to Russell Crowe, who's a big guy. So apparently Liam Neeson, Liev Schreiber, and Val Kilmer were considered for the role, which I find really interesting that Val Kilmer was.
Yeah, especially at this point, 2014. Did he still have his voice?
I'm not sure.
Because I thought he lost it a while ago.
There's a fascinating documentary.
I know
about
we've
that.
talked about
Yeah.
it, but everyone should look into that. What is it called again?
The name of the documentary is Val, and I believe I watched it on Amazon. I think it's either free there or it's pretty cheap to rent. But it's a fascinating documentary. But it would have been. I wonder how Val Kilmer would have looked in that role.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the casting is very good here. I don't think I need him to be physically imposing, because that's the whole point of his character, is that he's a king of a large group of people, and it's about his leadership skills and about his dominant personality. And I feel like that's exactly. I don't remember who this actor is, but I feel like he was perfectly cast.
Ray Winston plays Tubal Cain.
Yeah, which you guys might know him from his other role. He plays Ares in Percy Jackson. So going from that major role to this one, who's also like a warlord.
I am sure you're the only one here who's watched Percy Jackson. I have no idea what you're talking about.
He's uncredited on IMDb. It's like barely a role.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That feels weird that Ares would be uncredited in a movie about Greek gods.
Yeah.
He's also in The Departed. He's one of the guys in the gang.
Oh, it's been a long time since I've seen The Departed.
He looks way different with the long hair and the beard. I didn't catch that was who it was at first. But I like that character because I feel like they both him and Noah are kind of interpreting the will of God in their own way. Like Noah feels he's on this kind of holy mission that he's the only one strong enough to carry out, whether he's being righteous or not. And Tubal Cain, he says he's like, we're made in God's image so that we can tame the earth. And so I like that idea that they both believe in some way that they're fulfilling some kind of mission they're on, some kind of mission from God. And so that makes him a much more interesting antagonist. I didn't really think he was going to be a big deal outside of just bad guy who wants to fight you. But he develops into a much more interesting character.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too to balance those goals then, and which is why I think the story is kind of not a great entry into Christianity, like I said, because the moral implications of Noah's mission are, I'm going to kill everybody. I want to kill everybody. That doesn't seem like, that's certainly not the God of the New Testament, the God of love and forgiveness and turning the other cheek, and he's making waves. Whereas Tubal Cain is trying to save everybody.
Right.
He's painted as a very, very bad person, but he's trying to keep people alive in a domineering way.
Well, he's he's like, we're men, and do you want to stay alive? Like, I mean, he
and
seems
we can
to
get
have
together. Yeah.
He seems to have this like really impassioned speech.
Yeah.
And if you look at it from a different lens, if the story isn't built to be from the perspective of Noah, then you can look at Tubal Cain as being right. I mean, you could look at his goals as something that you would look up to, you would be motivated by. So I find that I said I didn't really find any of the characters especially interesting, but at least you need to get the protagonist and antagonist right. And I thought Aronofsky did a pretty good job with that.
They're almost both antagonists.
Mm-hmm.
No, I could agree with that.
Yeah. The way that the score changes sometimes when Noah's out.
Yeah,
Why did I say Noah's out? When Noah's on screen, sometimes the score changes to make him seem more sinister. So I took the impression that they were both antagonists from time to time.
Yeah, I really wish they would have created a more nihilistic moral landscape where both are right options, where both are good options, or at least they're seen that way through the character's eyes. And what really, because I mean, if you're going to change the story of Noah enough that it's not really the one in the Bible, then why do we really care about the implications? I think that's really what I'm getting at is why not make them equal footing, and then the climactic scene where they're fighting on the boat at the end has something more than just like, I'm trying to subvert God's plan, and you're trying to subvert God's plan, and I'm going to kill you. I'm the only one with God's authority, which I think is kind of ridiculous.
I thought that fight at the end of the movie on the boat was just terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it ended with the boat crashing, and I don't know. I thought both Tubal Cain and Noah, I thought they were pretty similar. Yeah, pretty similar at certain times. And Cain, he said at one point, like, "I told you, I'm not afraid of miracles." Like, he seems to be the one that's like, I'm not afraid of what God's choosing to do. I'm gonna be a human. I'm gonna do what He put me here to do, and
right.
just to interpret it totally differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw some of your notes where you said it'd be cool if Noah just went rogue and killed his entire family. I feel like, yeah, that's. I
That
feel
would
like
be a
that's
direction that I would see Aronofsky going with
Oh,
this.
totally. Yeah. Can
Yeah,
you
you're right.
even imagine? I feel like, yeah, that's more true with where they had started taking that character.
Yeah.
Because he's already completely isolated from his own family because he's decided to kill this baby.
Yeah, like this movie's already not a one-for-one story of what's in the Bible. So like go full parody with it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Well, then you'd really get alien vibes too if it's the family on the ark just trying to stay alive as Noah hunts them down.
Yeah.
yeah, and then Tubal Cain comes to the rescue. Oh my gosh.
That's a very
Man,
interesting story.
every Christian would have hated this movie.
But I agree with you, McKinnon. That is much more in line with an Aronofsky movie.
Yeah.
I agree with that. That would have been very interesting. It would have
'cause-
turned a ton of people off to it, but it would have been very Aronofsky.
Yeah, because you get to the halfway point and the flood would come and you'd be like, well, there's these watchers. That's kind of weird, but like I can still see why this is the story of Noah. And then they'd get on the boat and you're like, this is totally made a U-turn. This is so strange. That would be interesting. So I had a question for you guys actually while I was watching this. Do you wish that this was a foreign film? Because everyone speaking English was really disorienting to me. And I wish that it was in another language.
I feel like that a lot with most movies.
I imagine you do, Calvin.
I feel like, well, part of it too is I feel like it's much harder to tell bad acting when you hear someone that's, like I think everyone with a British accent is a better actor because I'm not picking up on the nuances that I would with someone with like a transatlantic accent or like anything else that's mainland American accent. So when you make something subtitles and it's completely foreign, you could just throw out a lot of the deliveries of lines, whether they matter or anything like that. It's really about body language then for acting. And I think all foreign movies are better for that reason, not because they are just better, but just because I cannot perceive the differences as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. When we talked about the tragedy of Macbeth, one of my biggest problems with it is like, why are so many people just speaking with an American accent? And then you have some people with a British accent. And I thought just the Michael Fassbender Macbeth was better, even though you have like Scottish and Irish and English accents.
And
I was like, I don't really perceive the differences in those.
yeah, and
so
German, Scottish.
Yeah. So just that movie instantly became more authentic to me for that reason. So I agree with you, either with an accent or by just changing the language altogether. I think the movie becomes more authentic for sure.
Or like some different languages. Like I always like when people speak, like they have some shared languages, and you would think that people are either all saying the same thing or they just all understand each other. Like at that time, or nobody understands each other.
Yeah, the other movie I was thinking about while I was watching this was The Passion of the Christ, which was obviously in another language. So I wonder, like, if that movie was done in English, that would have been like horribly received. So I wonder if this was in another language. Like if Noah was a foreign film, I think it would have been better, personally.
I think if
it was the whole thing was in Hebrew.
Yeah.
I think if you take out the fantasy elements and you want to do a really true retelling, then putting it in like Hebrew would work.
Yeah,
but I think if you want it to be, kind of get more fantastic and have your sort of epic action moments, it plays more to an American audience if you just have everyone speaking English.
For sure. Okay. Just a thought I had while I was watching. I was like, man, I wish there were subtitles on the screen right now.
So on that idea of it being in another language, like the Ari Handel has actually mentioned like the ideas surrounding race. Like from the beginning, they said they were concerned about casting and the issue of race. And they said what we realize is that this story is functioning at the level of myth, and as a mythical story, the race of the individuals doesn't matter. I feel like that's a very interesting way of looking at it. How does that land with you though? Because I feel like this is a biblical story, and like there's kind of, it should be something other than white people, I guess. That's kind of the way I would think.
It seems like a lot lately, there's a lot of criticism of like the depiction of Jesus as always this like bearded white man, and it gives off that idea that like someone who's holy and good is white, and it should be someone more like Middle East complexion. And so I actually tend to agree with that. I know there's a lot of problems with what was that movie about Egypt? Was that
Moses?
Prince of Egypt?
No.
Oh, Gods of Egypt is like Clash of the Titans, but Egypt.
Oh no, Avatar.
No, God.
Last Airbender.
No, the movie I'm talking about is Exodus, Gods and Kings, and it starred Christian Bale as Moses and Joel Edgerton as Ramses. And it had a lot of people were upset about that. They were like, why were no Egyptians cast in this movie? Like no one who actually was a descent from that population was used. It was 2 white guys. So I agree with that. I think this movie, I think Noah could have benefited from, let's add more people of color. I think anytime you can enfranchise more people, I like to see that in movies, whether the movie is put together well or any good. We talked about Power of the Dog, and I don't think that's a very good story. I mean, I don't think it's a very good movie, but I think it brings up a story about a repressed gay man, and so I like the idea of involving more of that into media, and so I think Noah would have benefited, and it would have involved more people, and so I'm all for that. So I think I would have liked the idea of a more diverse cast.
Yeah, and I think that he's onto something in the fact that this is a mythological story, that race doesn't matter. I just don't think that then you cast all white people, because if it's still existing, because Aronofsky has said the same thing about this being multicultural. Like Noah is the story of humanity, of all cultures and all religions. So why everyone is only white then is, I feel like, a misstep. I almost think that, like, you should just throw out genetics entirely, and every person in the family should also just be a completely different race, and that be the point.
Yeah, I think you just confused too many audience members.
I think
then they're like, are they adopted?
I think that if that's your goal, though, yeah, exactly. And that's like, that could be an interesting story. Noah, like, it would also help tie up the narrative, the fact that, like, let's say Noah's wife couldn't conceive children. Because the fact that he's so hung up on Elah's children, like, completely discounting the fact that his wife can still have children. Like, oh, I guess you're just never going to have sex again.
Right.
Like, so that's a bit of a plot hole. But, like, say she's barren and they've just adopted all of these children. I think that actually would work. And I don't think that it's necessarily outside of... I mean, yeah, you would subvert the genealogies in the Bible, but if that's really your goal, is this idea of myth and not actual physical history like the Bible says it is, then I don't have a problem with everybody being a different race then.
Right. No, I get that. And that would seem, again, more in line with Aronofsky to kind of put things in that subvert expectations.
Yeah.
So.
It also would then, these are the only other good people in the entire world, not just Noah's family, but like these are the good people that we've collected through our travels. That sounds like, I feel like collected is a bad word for, but if they're all orphans.
A little bit.
Is it weird that I don't think the race of actors in movies matter at all, and that if someone comes in and tries out for a part and they do a good job at it, it shouldn't matter what race they are and they should get the part?
I think the problem is that a lot of people would complain that Hollywood doesn't do it that way.
Yeah.
That white people just get the majority of the roles because they're either more popular or they're more well known.
Sure.
Or because
So-
the white people are the ones casting.
Exactly.
Which
That's
is
the thing.
interesting, because the first thing I thought about was Bruce Almighty, and Morgan Freeman plays God. And I don't think most people think of God as a black man.
But most people do think of Morgan Freeman, as God.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
So
I think Morgan Freeman being cast as God, that was actually more of a humorous trope than it was actual enfranchisement.
it might be. I also think he came in and tried out for the part and did a great job, and that's why he got it.
Yeah.
I feel like, though, Morgan Freeman doesn't try out for anything. I
He's
feel like
just given
I feel like he got to a certain point, like, why don't we just make Morgan Freeman
Maybe.
God? Like, because that,
Like
Yeah.
roles are written for him. He doesn't really try out for
yeah,
them.
exactly.
If a black actor tried out for Noah, I wouldn't care unless they were doing a bad job at it and it wasn't believable.
Can you imagine Idris Elba as Noah?
Oh gosh, that sounds
Yeah.
so good.
I know. I'm so
I would
glad
be-
Jaden's not here.
He hates him.
Yeah, no, he does hate him.
No, but I agree with you, McKinnon. I think if every role is given out based on merit, then then it shouldn't matter who gets cast in what role. But the
another-
problem is it's just not done that way.
Another movie I think about is Ghost in the Shell, and Scarlett Johansson was criticized for being in that movie, but I haven't seen Ghost in the Shell, but I bet she does a great job because she's a good actress. So it doesn't matter to me that the color of her skin is different than the source material.
Yeah, I don't think that. To me, I don't think that there really isn't anything necessarily wrong with that on surface level. It's how all of these structures are built in a way that really only benefit people in a cycle. white people get to this level of they're studio heads and directors, and they're the ones with all of the power, and they generally cast the people that they're friends with, the people that they know, and they connect more with those people, and they end up being a similar race, similar background, and that's why there's this constant cycle, and that's why it's an institution. That's why race, like there's this idea of structural racism, is the fact that no one is doing this on purpose, but you have to elevate people up to those levels at the same time so that we can just get past the fact that white people are cast in more things than black people, not because of their merit, but because of who they know. And when those things are eroded, then these conversations will, they're not going to go away, because there's still people that are inherently bigoted in it, and that will prevent people from being cast in movies that they're in charge of. But I agree. Like, I think that that's part of the myth of America, is that everything is based on a meritocracy.
Right.
That if you're good enough, you can get far and get ahead. But when you really look at even just the stories of everyone that's rich, they all just already started rich. It's not because that they worked harder or were, I think obviously the great example is Kim Kardashian. Like, I don't think that the world is set up for someone of that intelligence to get ahead at all unless they were already on top of the world.
What's her younger sister's name? She was named like
there's Kim, Chloe,
Kendall.
Whichever one has been put out as like the first
self-made
billionaires. Like, are you kidding me? Self-made, like
ridiculous.
coming from money, coming from like having the status, being so popular. To say you're self-made is so disingenuous. I also wanted to touch on where this movie was banned at. We've talked about how it's controversial in the United States and among Christians, but it was just outright not released in Bahrain, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. I've actually lived in two of those places. I was in Dubai for a while. That also includes like Abu Dhabi and Fujairah, and then I was in Bahrain for a while. And there is certainly media that gets put out there that is like censored and changed. We went and saw movies when I was in Dubai, and some just like weren't out, like were just straight up not released. And we knew that they were coming out in the States, so like there's definitely like a level of censorship there. So I think it's kind of interesting that people here have a problem with it, and they're just like, oh, it's not the Noah I wanted. But then it's just outright not played in other places.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too, like the reasons that it was banned in those places was a lot more tame than any of the criticisms that Christians have. It's just because that Islamic law disallows the depiction of religious figures.
Yeah.
Like you can't have statues of Muhammad or paintings or drawings.
Right.
So to depict, I think, because some of the genealogies between Judaism and Islam are the same or similar, and so I think one of them is is Noah. I think Noah might be in that, and so having Noah in the story just outright violates Islamic law. So, but that's it. It's just that. It's not because they found the story itself controversial,
Right.
although I'm sure they would have.
Yeah. All right, so I think we're getting ready to wrap this one up. Let's get into our final thoughts. McKenna, what did you think of this one?
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching this movie more than Mother, but I think it's worse than Mother. Those are my final thoughts. That's all I feel about this movie. I did not feel much.
So it's estimated that there were 35,000 different species on the Ark.
Okay.
So if you double that, 2 of every animal. So we're going to do this on a scale of 1 to 70,000. Where do you rate this movie? To make it easy, a 1 equals 7,000. Yeah. So if you need to add it up to do the math.
Well, I want to make sure I rate this lower than Mother. So yeah, to make sure that I rate Mother higher than this, I'll give this one 43,805,753.
Okay.
I think that's a number.
All right.
Okay.
Katya, what are your thoughts, and where do you rank this?
Yeah, ending thoughts. I just have #love. So, I'm glad it ended with the rainbow. It's kind of on a happy note. Yeah, I don't know. Ending thoughts. It was a lot of different things, and I feel like now I have a very skewed idea of the story of Noah.
That is such a good way to put it. I agree with you. It really ends on this really high note, which is just so not Aronofsky at all.
Yeah.
So I was not expecting that. I thought it was going to be more sadness.
Did you think love was like a theme in this movie?
Only because Hermione was in the movie and like he looked at him and was like filled with love, and she's like, oh yeah,
Like the twins. Like when I looked at them, I was just filled with love.
yeah, that
Okay.
seemed like the whole reason that humanity continued, which also seems the whole reason that the creator let Noah choose, because he did love them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he decided to let them choose.
That's interesting. That kind of came out of nowhere for me because I didn't think love was brought up heavily at all before that point.
Exactly.
You have the love between like Yula and Shem. Do you know that scene where they run into each other in the woods and they start kissing?
Yeah.
Apparently, they did so many takes of that scene that they both got like bloody lips and like, swollen lips and stuff. Very impassioned kiss.
That's
Yeah.
funny.
What do you score this?
I've never scored anything before, but I want to give it like all of the snakes and the dinosaurs that were missing. So, like,
Okay, so technically, most Christians will say that the dinosaurs were on the ark,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a.
but they went extinct after the ark.
they should still be there.
They are. That's what I mean.
Yeah. There's some hoop jumping in that.
I'm gonna go a little bit. I'll go like 41,000.
Okay.
2.
There's no way I like this movie more than you. I need to lower my score.
I do. I just didn't. I didn't have fun. I wouldn't watch it again.
No,
Right.
I wouldn't watch this movie
Yeah.
again either. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think of this, Calvin?
Yeah, so I think it's 2 movies. I think neither one of them are very good. It's not interesting thematically. It's the only thing that I find interesting and cool throughout the whole movie are just all of those montage sequences with the changing forms on top of, with all of those match on actions on top of each other.
Right.
That part is cool. That's very Aronofsky. But otherwise, yeah, they're both below average stories. I'm going to give it 37,590
Okay.
animals.
Did you not think that some of the montages were overused?
I didn't care because it was the only thing that was interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, it certainly doesn't fit with this movie, but I felt them just so visually arresting that I didn't care that they were so out of place.
You could tell Aronofsky was trying to say something, so you're like, okay, I'll allow it.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And mostly because, it's because of him. Like if Michael Bay decided to do this, it's like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen.
Because you would know he's just trying to copy someone else.
Yeah, or he was just trying to, like, it certainly wasn't his idea.
Yeah.
Or if it was like, well, he's an idiot, so it's a bad idea.
Right.
That's unfortunate that if someone like Michael Bay tried to do this, you wouldn't give him any credit. You would just be like, well, no.
I think
you don't
because
deserve it.
it's imitation of his own art. That's what makes this interesting.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Rather than something that just came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It's more of an artifact of his earlier style.
Okay.
I would put this at 45,000. I'm only the only one who used like a regular number. But yeah, I agree with Calvin.
We all used real numbers.
Yeah, I mean, you guys
I said 45 million or something. I gave a weird number.
You said 1,000 twice.
I did say 1,000 twice. I need to lower that.
I just went to what corresponded with 5 because I think it's kind of middle of the road. I like with Katya, I don't think I'd watch it again. I think there's still some.
That's
interesting-
35,000.
Oh, I meant 35. Yeah.
Okay.
35,000. It's got some interesting enough elements on it that feel Aronofsky, but not enough of them to make me as interested as. I mean, I dogged on Mother a lot. I still find that to be like a pretty interesting movie to watch because it still has some like really neat concepts and themes in it. This one, it either needs to be the story of judgment and wickedness of men that the first half of the movie is, or it needs to cover, I think, the themes of how humanity treats the earth. It needs to pick one of them to be. It can't be 2 different stories that literally stops like halfway through it. I think I paused the movie when they get on the ark and the flood starts because I was like, there's no way I'm at the end of this. Like, it doesn't feel that long, but it is. It's like exactly halfway through, and that's when the whole story shifts.
I was so surprised that there was so much movie left after the flood.
Yeah.
I can understand 30 minutes to button everything up.
Yeah.
I cannot understand how you justify a whole nother hour and Tubal-Cain being on that boat.
Yeah.
So do you think that there shouldn't have been like a stowaway on the ship?
Absolutely not.
And it
because
should've
brings up all of those other themes of like, because he's like, oh, you're a man now when Ham kills him. Like, that has nothing to do with anything. We
That
don't
felt
care
so
about that.
undeserved.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He's saying,
which
like,
we didn't talk
men are
about at all. I wish that
evil.
we did talk about that because that whole of Percy Jackson killing his father was it was.
Oh, man.
I can't say it was out of nowhere, but it was completely undeserved. I thought.
It just didn't seem like it fit with the rest of the movie.
Well, it wasn't built on much.
Yeah.
Like he just said a
I
couple
agree.
times that this girl he liked died.
Yeah. All right.
That's all.
I mean, it's implied. He doesn't know for sure. He just blames his dad for it.
Yeah.
All right, with that, we're going to wrap this one up. I want to thank McKinnon for being on, as always. And Katya, it was great to have you on. It's nice to have another perspective on this. And Calvin, thanks again, as always, for being on here with me. And remember, you can find our podcast on different platforms like Spotify and Apple Music. We also upload all these to YouTube. Go ahead and leave a comment. Tell us what we're doing well. Tell us what we're doing wrong. And leave suggestions for movies we can review in the future. And with that, thank you for listening to Now This Is Podcasting.